Good evening. Welcome to the next episode for Thinkers Dialog. It is absolutely a pleasure for me to welcome a very interesting guest, Anuradha Goyal. In fact, I got to know Anuradha through a very good common friend, and that is Dr. Vivek De as you would notice, you would know that we had an interaction with Vivek some time back, and then of course and I have done a few pieces together. And Anuradha is actually doing a book that Vivek Debroy on Navratri, which is expected to get launched sometime soon. So if you really look at her profile, is something very interesting. We come from the same city. That's the most interesting part, which I just got to a conversation just before this. We come from the same city, city of Chandigarh, Panchkula. She grew up in Chandigarh, but her profile is something very interesting. And, like she's a trained science person. So did something in computer science, did her MS and so on and so forth. And then suddenly she got into writing, something on what do you call culture, to something on the temples of India, and she does a travel blog. She's written on innovation as well, so that is one part. But I think the most interesting part is that she's written on temples, and she's actually been writing the what do you call travel blogs. But most fascinating thing about her is that she certainly is a voracious reader. For somebody who has reviewed close to about 700 or 800 books, means that you have to be a voracious reader to review. So she's an encyclopedia of knowledge in many ways. So that is where it is. But claim to fame is that I recently wrote an article on Navratri for a book which she rejected. So that is where,
please edit this out.
So that is where it is. But then I think, but quite interestingly, I think it's a fascinating personality, and I would recommend that you should really look at her books and do follow her website, anuradhagoyal.com and indetails.com, right? So that's where it is. Thanks a lot for joining us, Anuradha ji, for this conversation today.
Namaste, and thank you so much for having me, Amitji. It's a pleasure to speak to somebody who comes from the same city. It's a pleasure to speak to somebody with whom you've done some work. It may not have reached a level, but we did something together. And you're doing a fascinating job with, bringing so many unheard voices on your platform. And, we're getting to learn so much about different perspectives on different topics. So it's a privilege to be a part of.
Thank you, Anuradha. We'll quickly dive into the conversation. So, like as an author, you've written on such array of topics, a wide variety of topics, from innovation to sacred temples of India, which of course got translated into Hindi as well. And then you've done reports for CII on innovation, and you've written travel blogs, and in addition, you've written so many book reviews. What defines you as an author, or somebody, I would say, a thinker in many ways, as a person?
Thinker, I don't know, but as an author, actually nothing defines me. If I really look at my journey, when I was studying physics, I thought I almost imagined myself to be some kind of an Einstein coming out of the university. That didn't happen. I went into computer science because that was the time to do computer science, got placed into IT industry, which was absolutely nascent when we entered IT industry. We had no idea where it will lead us to. We were just going with the flow. While I was there, blogging happened, because it was a new tool. It was something which we were experimenting with. I just started writing about all the travels I was doing and my reflections on the books I was reading. So I didn't start traveling. I was always a traveler. It's something that I inherited probably from my family. And also being a defense kid, you get to travel. I mean, that's part of your growing up. But so I just went with the flow. Everything happened organically. I just followed my interest. I didn't let it come in the way of a structured approach, saying that if I project this image of myself, I will not get this. Or if I do this, I will not do this. I just went with what I wanted to do at that point in time, and this is where I have landed.
So
It's
just
very difficult to put into any of the boxes, uh, especially when journalists speak to me and they want you to fit into one of the defined boxes. They say, you can't put me into boxes because by the time you create a box for me, I would have moved ahead.
so you jumped onto another box by that time.
Yeah, so I see my life more as a flow. And if you just keep flowing, at some point in time, you become the flow.
Got it. So that's a fairly deep philosophical view to how you would really look at your journey until
Yes,
now.
yes, yes. And whenever I have tried to define things, or control things, I have achieved some success, some failures. But when you let it happen, you end up doing things much bigger than you could even imagine.
Okay, that's
That
interesting.
also says I have pretty low standards for myself, but
I don't know. I think it is far more pragmatic a view in terms of how you really look at life and how you're really trying to define the journey.
uh, I would not define, because if you speak to me 3 years down the line, I might just say all that, I moved ahead and this has changed. But at this point in time, I think I'm just going with the flow and trying to do things that I enjoy.
Got
If
it.
I don't enjoy doing, or if I no longer enjoy doing things that I used to enjoy, I just let them go. And I have a pretty liability-free life, so that helps.
And so, since you've been writing for a long time and things, before I jump into your work and get into your ideas, but like you also help authors and you review books and things. Uh, what do you think is the most fulfilling thing for you as a person, as a writer, as an author, and as an experience of writing? What's the most fulfilling thing for you?
See, for me, in terms of my existence, I must learn something every day. That's the core of my existence. The day I don't learn anything, I'm irritated. I'm not myself. So for me, learning and writing is a process of learning. When you have to write something, you study it, you observe it, you experience it far more deeply than you would otherwise. A lot of time people now travel with me and say, we were there with you on the same trip, how come you saw 100 things that we did not see? But that's because my sense of observation has gone up, my sense of engagement with the space has gone up because I write. When I started writing, and I'm not a trained writer, nobody in my family is a writer, and the region that we come from is not particularly known, and the times we grew up in is not particularly known for writers. But if you look at my initial pieces, I would travel for 5 days and write maybe 500 words. Today, I can walk on a road for 2 hours and write 5,000 words. So that's the learning curve I have gone through. So
So you are starting to build a very unique sensory perception of the space around you. That
yes,
is how you would look at it.
yes, yes, and also the more you do same kind of things, you start connecting and start learning. So I may see something in place A, and then when I visit place B, I look for that. Is it there? Is it not there? Kind of thing. So your sense of observation goes up. In fact, I keep telling a lot of my corporate clients that you should make people travel so that they can improve their sense of observation, and that's when their innovation will happen. Most corporates are struggling with getting new ideas.
So like you made a very important point, Anuradha ji, and that is about sense of
Please don't call
observation.
me G. Anuradha is good.
So Anuradha, you're making a very important point on the sense of observation, and how do you inculcate that spirit is going to be a very profound question for each one of us who's a learner, who's trying to chase knowledge, who's trying to really write something, do something, or even create a corporate strategy. So how do you really push into that direction?
See, first of all, I must have a sense of curiosity. I see sense of curiosity missing big time. It's we are there because in the corporate world specifically, people are there because they're supposed to be there. And also, corporate world trains you on what they call SOPs, standard operating procedures. So, which kind of straitjackets you, and the moment you break SOPs, you are punished in some way or the other. So you train people to follow a route, a path where any deviation is going to punish them. And then suddenly one day you get them into the room and say, now please give me new ideas. How do you expect?
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
not going to happen.
what you're really saying is that when you really get straitjacketed through processes, that can actually be one of the most telling effects on your
That
performance, on
is,
your creativity.
yes, you cannot expect the same person to follow all the processes, stick to the rules defined, stay within the boundaries, and then give you out of the box ideas. So
So
creativity has to be inbuilt in your processes. In fact, I write an innovation column for New Indian Express. And I think a couple of months back, I wrote an article on how corporates need to incorporate creative rituals in their calendar so that the creativity is kind of uh, ignited regularly rather than on a need basis. Suddenly some strategy guy says that give me 5 ideas, and then you all struggle to find. Instead, you have to on a yearly calendar, you have to have pockets where you nurture creativity in the system. So because you cannot time ideas can come anytime. You just have to keep yourself open to receive them.
Anuradha,
Create intersections where innovation happens.
so Anuradha, you make again a very important point on things like, say, creative rituals or what. But I think our basic learning, as I see it, and I could be horribly wrong, and please tell me if I'm wrong, we get absolutely embedded in associative barriers. When I say associative barriers, embedded with our past learning and everything, and we just try to look at things in a very straitjacketed way. So, how do you break down that whole associative barrier to our thinking and really inculcate that creative spirit? Because what you're really saying is creative rituals. And there is a second part to this question, and that is that when you talk about creative rituals, you're also talking about corporates who could fear that there could be a lot of indiscipline. Or so, how do you really look at these two issues?
So, uh, see, the way corporates are organized, they they don't want to nurture too much creativity because they would not know what to do with those ideas. If too many ideas come, they would not know. They don't have a defined process to manage a funnel of ideas, if there is one. So they want something. The way they are organized is that if you need something, you press a button and it should come. It's like if I need something, I can order it and it should come. But unfortunately, creativity has to be nurtured on a continuous basis for your brain to give you those ideas. Your brain has to be tuned to those. So I'll give you a basic example. People who are in the field, let's say the sales and marketing teams, which are out there in the field for most organizations, who are interacting with your customers, consumers. Uh, if you're not taking their feedback, if you're just looking at their performance metrics, if you're just looking at how to improve their productivity, if you're not spending enough time to take creative feedback from them, that what are the next potential things that we can do, then you are not utilizing their potential. You're not utilizing the experience that they are gathering on the ground. Tell me, I don't know how many organizations have that built in. How many organizations have a process built in where the ideas from the ground are picked up in a organized way on a regular basis, not as a knee-jerk reaction?
So, you're really throwing out a challenge to the corporate here itself in terms of saying that you really need to really look at ideas from bottoms up, and if you don't do it, you are effectively missing a lot of value creation that can happen for the world. uh, do they see this as an idea which can give them economic benefits over a period of time?
Uh, it depends. We can't paint everybody with the same stroke. I'm sure there are organizations which are doing that. Uh, but the traditional organizations, I think there is a lot of scope.
Very, very interesting. And they're just moving ahead on this. You have really focused on ideas of culture and tradition. in your work. And how do you think your work that you've done on innovation, the work with the corporations, and your work in terms of understanding culture and tradition, how does this really embed together?
So, the three things that I primarily do is travel, read, write, and in the three spaces of innovation, travel, and books. So, where does innovation happen? Where does innovation take place? It takes place at intersections of two different worlds, different ideas, philosophies, different verticals, whichever dimension you pick up. Now, how do you? What are the ways to take yourself to those intersections? Sometimes it happens by chance, by some kind of a serendipity or something. But most of the time, we have to take ourselves to those intersections. How do you take yourself to those intersections? One is travel, because you're literally picking up yourself from your own comfortable environment to an environment which is alien, where everything is different. And when everything is different, your sense of observation goes up by itself. The time and space which we cannot visit in our lifetimes can be visited through books. So when you read a book which is set in 500 years ago, or even a science fiction which is set 500 years hence, you go to another time and space, and you are meeting the ideas of an author who you potentially would never meet. So these are the conscious intersections that you push yourself to, and that's where the ideas happen. In fact, my book Lotus in the Stone is all about connections. How India is connected, and it's fascinating how things are connected. Because of my training in science and business and management, I can tell you, when I study temples, let's say I look at one particular temple. Now, history is one part of it, architecture is one part of it, but you look at the visual history that's written on it and the way it is written. You know, uh, for for somebody who comes with a science background, when you go and listen to an art historian talk about one single Ajanta painting for 2 hours, describing each and every detail with uh, you know 20 to 25 dimensions of uh, history embedded in it, which is either still living, or even if it's lost or transformed into some other form and shape, you see a journey. You literally see a journey, and you don't want to break that journey. It's like taking the baton from your ancestor and passing it on to the next generation. So it's on. You start seeing the connection. So where I think my USP lies, if I can use that word, is seeing the connections between culture, art, history. And my sense is that the age of analysis, which had set in during the industrialization age, we got into this very age of analysis where everything has to be analyzed, broken, specializations and deep dives. It will slowly transform into age of synthesis, where you'll have to bring in different disciplines together and create something. And it's happening in some way with Industry 4.0 and all. It's kind of happening.
So you make a very important point, and that is about really creating something what you would call as a Medici effect. I think Franz Johansson has actually
Yes.
said that in
Yes.
many, many ways. And that is where you're really alluding to.
Yes.
Create
Yes.
that intersection of learning and go about it. And
in fact, we need to study Medici effect as one city, one renaissance is spoken about. I don't see a reason why our cities like Kashi, Banaras, it has been doing what Medici did at certain point in time. Banaras has been doing it for ages, and it continues to do in some sense. It's not a coincidence that so many creative people, artists, singers, musicians come out of that city, poets come out of that city. It is not a coincidence. It is something like a Medici effect, but in a more sustainable way.
but then when you really talk about this, I have to ask you that question. Since you talked about Banaras or Varanasi or Kashi, as you say, uh, it's been a melting pot in many, many ways as a city.
Yes.
But somehow we have really ignored that city in many ways as well. I think the whole focus for us has been on economic way of growth or whatever, rather than saying there is so much that can happen through art and culture, and we can create so much of economic prosperity through it. Why does that actually happen? Because this also means that we are losing the very sense of our tradition and that might actually exist and that we have, and we are not really appreciating it.
See, there are three, four ways to answer this. One is, if you look at history, the art, culture, these kind of things flourish when the economy is flourishing. So economy has to flourish. Even in our lifetimes, if you see, I think the lowest point of Indian art was 1980s, early 90s, when our economy was in a bad shape. Now that our economy is looking little better, we see some focus on art and culture. So art and culture, and if you look at the best temples, in fact, in one of my talks on temple tales, I had put two temples uh, side by side, one belonging to 10th century, an epitome of Kandariya Mahadev temple in Khajuraho, which is an epitome of Indian art, and at this, which is a royal temple, and all of these are royal temple, and then one temple called Maharani temple in Gulmarg, which was built about 100 years ago, which is also a royal temple built by a queen. Both are royal temples, royal patronage, but you see a sea of difference. 100 years ago, India's economic condition, the economic condition of the kings who built it was entirely different. So you see a sharp contrast between them. So that is one. Second, Banaras was not the only one. We had seven Saptapuris, as we call it: Ayodhya, Mathura, Maya, Kashi, Kanchi, Dwarka, Puri, Dwaravati. These seven cities, which is Ayodhya, Mathura, Kashi, Ujjain, Dwarka, and Kanchipuram. These were all the Mokshadaini cities. They are said um, in the scriptures, but I would say they were all our trade centers. Even Kashi, Kashi, despite its the cultural relevance, it was also the crossroad. Banaras falls at the crossroad of what was called Uttar Path and Dakshin Path. So there were two major roads, one joining somewhere from Afghanistan to Dhaka, which is the GT road that we call today. So that, and the path going from somewhere around Patna to Patan in Maharashtra. The crossroad happened at somewhere around Kashi or Kashi. So it was the intersection where all the traders passed by. So it was the center of trade route. So today we see Banaras as a spiritual city only, but it was a major trading city. Even in Kabir's poetry, when you study Kabir, who lived maybe 600 years ago, you see it as a great trading center. He talks about bazaar, Kabira khada bazaar mein maange sab theek hai. He talks about market. He talks about weavers market. It was a great big textile market.
That is fascinating in terms of the historical significance of how cities have grown. So like it takes to a very important point. You're saying that wherever trade centers were there, where movement of people was actually happening through certain locations, those were the centers which were actually thriving in economic activity, and that really instilled that spirit of what you would call as art and things.
Art was not an independent entity as we see it today. So in the West, art is something that you buy and put it on your wall. That was not our culture. In our culture, art was a part of your everyday living. If you go to your grandmother's house, you will see, and you pick up the utensils of that time, each utensil is a piece of art. It is custom built for you and your family, probably a family insignia or some sign which tells you this comes from this family. Whether it was our clothes, whether it was our items of everyday use, whether it was painting the walls, there were like what I was calling creative rituals, is something like once a year the women in the family would get together and paint their walls the way they want their home. So every home looked different. So this concept that art is something that you buy, and there is a category of people who are artists, and the other, I mean, assuming that others are not, is a very, very recent and Western concept. in the ancient India, we assumed everybody is an artist. Yeah, some may be better than the others, but in their everyday life, everybody practiced their own art.
Why did we lose sense of uh, art, as you're really suggesting? Where did this happen? Like, because it is not something which would have happened in a day. It must have taken years for this to really fructify.
So a lot of it happened. Actually, it's not just India; it's worldwide. I mean, uh, if you look at even the other, I mean, the ancient societies or tribal societies around the world, it's the same. All the societies were similar. I think this is more an impact of industrialization, where we started producing standard products. So we needed consumers who were, standard consumers of our standard products.
Mhm. And like you alluded to a very interesting temple called Khajuraho. And like I've been to Khajuraho, I spent a week there, and I think it was one of my most fascinating experiences of understanding as to how we were really looking at temples. In fact, as I see it, I found Khajuraho to be a center of what do you call as art in its purest form. Like this is where they were really projecting that like what God means or what godliness means, what relationships mean, how it can actually get embodied. But somewhere uh, we have discarded that whole idea of what I would call as Khajuraho was the epitome of flexibility, openness to ideas, and we are not there today. What transpired? Like why did we go there? Because from being an extremely open society as on ideation to what we were really depicting to where we are today. And when I say today, it's today means the last 100 years. It's something like it's a continuum. It's a time period of last 100 years.
So, number one, Khajuraho is not the only one. Khajuraho is the one which has magically managed to survive. So, a whole of North India was full of similar temples. Your Delhi was full of similar temples. If you go to the ASI museum in Purana Killa, you can see some glimpses of what Delhi was and what Delhi temples were, and they were no less than Khajuraho. But somehow, magically, for whatever reason, Khajuraho have managed to survive. And a lot of temples in South India. You should visit Tanjore, you should visit Kanchipuram. They have magically. Now, on why we have lost and how come we are open to, I don't know, but I don't know if I have the answer to it. But I think somewhere as Indians, we have stopped believing in excellence and our own inner potential. We have started believing that we've started living a life where somebody tells me to do something and I just do finish that task and I'm done with it. I don't see that pursuit of excellence that probably our ancestors had. I mean, we've not met them, but their work talks about it. Uh, Let me give you a very, very crude, simple example from everyday life. You visit a shopping mall, a grocery store. There are these kids in their 20s, early 20s, standing there manning the place. You ask them about 5 items, they rarely know. I have never come across somebody. They're wearing that uniform. They have that plastic smile. They will say, "May I help you? Can I help you?" But beyond that, they don't know. And when I tell the corporates, they say, "Oh, it's a training issue. We'll organize some training." No, it's not a training issue. It's an attitude issue. You are standing there 8 hours a day selling something which is an everyday use item. You have to make an effort to learn. It doesn't matter whether it will be relevant for you 10 years down or not, or in all probability it will be. But I don't see that learning attitude. You're spending 8 hours there and you're not learning. And you'll see the same thing. You speak to call center employees, you speak to everyday consumer facing people. If you talk to, that pursuit of excellence is there in a very small population, very, very small population.
Anuradha, you're hitting at a very important issue, and the issue of learning. When I talk to the corporate CEOs, and of course, and what they really tell is that like one of their biggest challenges that they face is with the people that they have, including the senior members of the team. They have stopped reading. They have stopped looking at things from a fresher perspective. They're possibly not even looking at newspapers. They're not looking at opinions. They're not reading the books that are getting published. They're not looking at newer set of ideas. Where is this coming from? Like, is it that we have lost that spirit of learning? Is that we have lost that spirit of questioning? Or what is it?
We have, yeah, I mean, I would say our pursuit of excellence. I don't want to be the best in whatever I'm doing. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but you have to at least strive to be better at what you are doing. I mean, I have had cases where, in some universities, I was invited in some places and to give a talk or something. And I give a talk and they say, well, you've not studied it. How come you know more about this subject than we do? And they're all PhDs in that subject. That's because they're not willing to look at it. When I tell them, I have spoken to, tourism is something I'm really passionate about, and I hope I can make even an iota of difference to tourism in this country. But when I talk to people in the tourism academia and I tell them that you please introduce a course on Indian travel traditions and I will help you design it, I will give you all the information, I haven't gotten a single positive reply as of now, or an inclination to do so.
So, when you say Indian travel traditions or a course on Indian travel traditions, don't you think we, as society, we have lost that flavor of traveling, of being nomadic, or just trying to explore also? Because again, what you're saying, the idea of curiosity and travel is effectively synonymous with curiosity. So aren't we really losing it in our day-to-day living and how we're really existing as people?
Yes, because that standardization of experience is happening in tourism as well. What happened to our products is happening in our services also now. So everybody must go to a particular resort in a particular destination, click the same photographs and post the same things as a brag value. The deeper sense of travel, the traveling for learning, traveling for exploring, traveling for widening your horizon, nobody talks about that. They only talk about, I have an internship program, and as and when I get students from universities, they all think travel is about free travel and some selfies for Instagram, and that's travel.
So, let me bring things together here, one on learning and one on traveling. So, there's something very interesting, and I always find it very fascinating. My dad is 76, and my dad is one of the biggest or the most curious learners I've ever seen in my life. Like, he continues to read, he continues to attend those webinars, trying to be ahead of everything. And then next generation, I had probably a little less in me, and the next generation has even less than that. And the curiosity, I think, has just diminished over a period of time. Why has that actually happened? Like, are they the people who were born immediately around independence? They had that will to struggle or will to survive, to really make a difference, to generation now which sees everything being given on a platter, and that idea of learning has just diminished?
I agree with you. My father is roughly the same age as your father. And when I come back, when I travel to a new destination, I have to come back and give them a complete detailed information on what is there. And they want to go. If they have not seen that destination, they want to go there. And they listen to it with an intention that, can I go there? But my siblings don't do that.
So,
they are more interested in coming to Goa. They are more interested in those brag worthy, those some trending destinations, if I can say so. And so I don't know if it is more of an urban phenomena, and by urban I mean all the urban areas in the country, or it is more of a social media phenomena, because there is a value attached to bragging on social media. I don't know.
Like, on an interesting note, like, as you were talking about your experience, your father asking you questions. For me, my biggest fear is, like, if I travel somewhere my father will ask the most difficult question of what did you see. So I have to see it properly because I'm going to get quizzed at this age as well by him. That is where you have to learn. But I think the spirit of learning is coming from the parents in many ways. Uh, and so just moving ahead on this, like I would like to go back on the idea of culture itself. When you talk about culture, when you talk about tradition, how important is tradition in really looking at the way we look at the world, the way we look at progress? And I ask you that question in light of something very interesting that is happening in our neighborhood. And when I say neighborhood, that is Afghanistan. There is at one end, like you're typically saying, oh, it is all about tradition and whatever, and we're just trying to protect it. And here we are, in one way that okay, there could be a tradition which is far more open. How do you really look at that?
So, for that, let's understand what is tradition. What is tradition? Tradition is something, let's say, if, for the sake of simplicity, let's say your grandmother has inherited something, and she added her own experiences to it. She passed it on to your mother. Your mother passed it on to you. So tradition is something that you inherit, something that you add your own experiences to, uh, tweak it for the current day requirements, and pass it on to the next generation. It is not static. So the difference I see between neighborhood and us, and hopefully it is true, is that tradition is not cast in stone. And at least Indian tradition nowhere says that it is cast in stone and it must be done so. And there is only one way to do it. For everything, we have thousands of alternatives to do something. And the biggest thing they say is that you have to, anubhav is the word. Your own experience is valued above everything else. So even when you read Upanishads, they don't say read us and follow us. They tell you what is the collective wisdom of the sages and the people they would have observed and created that knowledge. But they always say add your own anubhav to it, add your own experience, because experience is the only thing that will give you conviction. Without your own experience, the conviction will never come, no matter how much we read. It will always be second-hand knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference is static, or is it evolving tradition?
Like I will put a question from the audience. So there's a very interesting question from Sudhir. Sudhir Nair, I'll just read it out for you. It is fascinating listening to you on ancient India, its history and culture. But why have we reached a stage where, if we look into our past, the last 400 years is where it ends? And if anything before that is considered pushing a majoritarian agenda, why do we need any external validations for what our past was, be it in terms of engineering, medicine, education, etc.? Why does any reference to what is rightfully our discovery met with so much cynicism and viewed with an orange lens?
Yes. So there is no answer to this. Why do we seek validation? But I can tell you that we can stop it by seeking validations ourselves. One person not seeking it will inspire 10 people not seeking it. They will inspire. It's like a geometric progression that will happen. So you have to stop doing it. And I'll tell you from my personal experience, about 6-7 years ago, I started posting one temple every morning on Twitter. And initially there was a lot of resistance from people saying this is a secular space, you can't post temple pictures. So I said, one, I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm just saying I start my day by posting a temple picture. And today you see on Twitter, there are so many handles who are posting so many temple pictures from around the world. We've changed it. Now nobody objects. People just say, okay, you're celebrating, as long as you're not being derogatory to anybody else. So you can change it. I live in Goa. For last 6-7 years, I've been living in Goa. And Goa, what do you know about Goa? You know about its beaches, you know about its churches. I have written 50 plus articles on temples and ancient traditions of Goa. ancient festivals of Goa. And I have hundreds of emails saying that now when we visit Goa, we keep one day for these things, or we plan around these festivals that you've told about. And even till today, nobody else, not even Goans, have written about those things in the public domain. So, one person at a time is what we can change. We all realize the problem, but somewhere we have to start acting on the solution. We can keep dissecting why did this happen, will this change, but it's time now we start changing, and we also start defining the Indic way of living, which is a very, very holistic way of living. Whether it is holistic with yourself, your own body, or your family, or your society, um, like you said, being open to all the ideas that come from anywhere, but while being rooted in your own land, in your own traditions, in your own lineage.
So, just a curious question again from your point and the two previous answers. So you said like one is that we can actually look at the whole idea of not seeking validation from outside and whatever, and we should start it. But you also say something on the idea of anubhav or experiences. So how do you really bring these two thoughts together, experiences and validation? Because experience is also something which possibly helps me invalidate what is being written. Say if I'm really talking about the Bhagavad Gita, or if I'm really talking about the Quran, or if I'm talking about the Bible, I read it and I experience it, and I can actually put a certain view to it. So how do you really look at this?
Okay, so whatever you read, or whatever you study, or whatever you are taught, experience it, and experience leads to conviction. And once you are convinced that you no longer need validation, it's like if let's say an Ayurveda medicine works for me, I am convinced and I don't need validation. I will not go to a science forum and say, now please validate this once it has worked on me. So experience will lead to conviction, and conviction uh, will will leave no space for the need for validation. The need for validation is when I'm not convinced, so I want somebody else to convince me. I need some kind of a validation from some peer research, some newspaper guy writing something about something. And if you've dealt with media, you know how selective they are in reporting what they report.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to get into media and how the processes work, but I'll.
But unfortunately, they dictate. Let me tell you, even in my own family, people believe what the newspaper says more than what I say, even if I was present there. That's the power of media. We're not talking about that today, but the power of media is immense. We cannot ignore it.
Would you like to call it media or social media?
Media.
Okay.
Media.
And like just going back to our conversation, Dheeraj asks a very interesting question, which I think we should ask, and that is, you mentioned about a lot of different temples in Delhi and other locations, right? So which were very similar to Khajuraho and things. But it seems, and we have lost it, and we have lost that whole idea. The same happened to knowledge, innovation, and learning openness. What's your view to avoiding the same or the same experience or anubhav and not pass on the traits to the next generation? Because it becomes an intergenerational thing from his point of view. So
I think it's important, one, we study our scriptures, because that's the only thing available to us in some form and shape, whatever shape they are available to us. I see a lot of resurgence of Sanskrit studying. I don't know about North India, but in the Western India, in the Southern India, even Central India, there is a huge resurgence. Outside India, Indian diaspora is focusing so much on Sanskrit learning. There are so many forums available online to learn Sanskrit. Read scriptures, talk to people, try to see what makes sense from that, and then imbibe them. We have to start living that, and once we start living that, it will live on. We don't have to do an effort. a big concept, and I'm going to quote Kabir on it, is that everything has to happen sahaj. Too much effort, kind of drains you. It has to happen in a very sahaj, in a very effortless way. You have to slowly absorb it and start reflecting it. You start living it, and you can only inspire by living those things. You can tell a child that not to speak a lie, but if he sees you speaking a lie, he's bound to lie. The only way to keep this culture alive is by living this culture.
So pass on the experiences, pass on, because children will learn exactly as to how you really practice things, and that's. Mhm. But when you talk about tradition and culture and history,
Mhm.
we cannot accept at all points in time that everything that we see is absolutely right or whatever. There have been many political views. In fact, like there have been a lot of back and forth in terms of whether women should enter a certain set of temples or not enter a certain set of temples in the name of tradition. And the world has also moved forward. How do you really look at those aspects of life?
Yeah. So that's where the anubhav comes in. So you have to have your own anubhav to know whether to follow that, whether that tradition is still relevant or not. I would not say whether it is right or wrong, but whether it is relevant or not anymore. Now, as far as the women entering temples is concerned, that's a complete science in itself, because um, in the modern day world, we assume that male and female bodies work the same way, while women's bodies work in a very, very different way, especially in their reproductive era, in their reproductive age. And temples are, uh, again, we see them as structures today, but they are energy points. They are very, very high energy points. And a very high energy point can impact a woman's body during her reproductive age. So that's a complete science in itself. So we don't understand that science, and without understanding that science, we should not uh, question the tradition. But the uh, probably the conflict comes that people who are holding on to tradition are not able to explain it in the language that we understand today.
Mhm. So, have you taken it onto yourself at any given point in time?
Sorry, come again. Your
Have you
voice is broken.
taken have you taken it onto yourself to explain to people of how to really go ahead and?
I have not taken an activist route for myself. That's not my chosen thing. My chosen way is to put light on things and then let people decide what they want to see and what they want to do. So that's my chosen path. Every time I have been asked a question, I have explained it. But there are people who are working on explaining this bit. There are people who've written books about it. I know at least two people who have written two books on explaining this whole phenomena of how women get impacted when they go to these bodies, and it's to do with, there are two three concepts in Indian systems. One is the concept of sukshma sharira, the subtle body. So the modern science works only on gross body, which is the body that you can see through your five senses, or whatever you can uh, observe and experience through five senses, while the Indian systems work on the Sukshma Sharira, which is a subtle body, which is something that you can feel, but you cannot see, you cannot observe through the modern available scientific instruments, at least not the common ones. So this, when you go and study at the Sukshma Sharira level, that's when a lot of Indian things start making a lot more sense.
Like I have a very, very strong question. Uh, what do you call on this? And Sunil asks that question, and that is, this is getting into mumbo jumbo. Let us be scientific here. Can you please share the scientific evidence on this? There is no energy in temple. It is just a building. It is all in our mind.
Depends which temples you have visited. So if you are visiting temples which have been built not using the Vastu Shastra of the temples, not following all the principles, yes, it's just a building. But then why do you call it a temple if it's no different from your home? Why do you call it a temple and why do you go there? That's a question you need to ask yourself. You want to feel the energy of the temples, you have to visit some of the Shakti Peeths which have had traditions, which have a worshipping tradition which is not broken. You go to the temples in Kanchipuram, which are potentially the only temples that were not really attacked, or where the worship has not stopped, or they have not been moved here and there. So you have to look at some of those temples, spend some time there, follow the tradition, in the sense you go and sit there for some time, and then if you don't feel the energy, then let's talk. So most of the modern day temples, which have randomly come up and they don't follow any architecture, I agree with.
So, like this gets into a very interesting domain. Like, I think a lot of us can question, or a lot of us can really push back. I think the other pushback that Sunil might actually want to make, and I'm just doing it on his behalf because he's not live here, he can just send the questions, and that is going to be whether something like Vastu Shastra even makes sense. Should we even believe in it in present age form and things?
Okay. So you have to believe in that there are the Earth's energy is not uniform across the. We all know that, and that can be measured. Now, there are books by Dr. Rana P.B. Singh, who has studied a lot of Banaras, and the Kashi Mandala, as they call it. And there are a lot of his lectures online, which you can refer to, or his books. And he has actually worked on some projects by the Western agencies of NASA's and the Western universities, where they've taken and measured the energy points at the places where temples were originally located. In fact, they could trace the original locations or some of the most famous temples based on those energy points, and we could see that the original temple has moved from here to here because Banaras was attacked and invaded a lot more times. So there is a science to it. Let me give you some examples which are very easily observable. You go to a place called Sringeri, there is a temple called Vidya Shankar temple. Okay, inside the temple, there are 12 pillars which correspond to 12 zodiac signs. Now, zodiac signs is simple because they are like, you can map it. It's an enclosed temple with a small door, but the first rays of sun fall on the in pillar in which the sun is at the moment. So, for example, right now sun is in Leo. If you visit that temple, the morning sun rays will fall on the pillar which is Leo or Simha. So are you saying that they didn't know that and this is just a building? In fact, I have seen many such temples and read about many more. I think they were all observatories because we knew the skies. We knew the skies. Kumbh Mela, we know that it's at least been happening for 2000 years, and it happens when Jupiter enters a certain constellation, and Jupiter's cycle is about 12 years. That's why we have it after 12 years. So every time it enters Makar, we have a Kumbh Mela in Prayag. Every time it enters Kumbh, we have a Kumbh Mela in Haridwar. Every time it enters Simha, we have a Kumbh Mela in Nasik. So they knew the mapping of sky, and they knew how to map that onto the earth. So there are a lot of things. It's all in bits and pieces. We don't have all the pieces to solve the jigsaw puzzle. But to say that temples had no energy, then why would you need temples? If temple had no different energy, why would you need a temple? In fact, if you see the building, the Garbhagriha, the way it is built, it is meant to concentrate energy there.
Mm-hmm. So, again, very fascinating and just a curious question. And I know we're also moving towards the end of our conversation. Like when you talk about astronomy, I think there is very clear evidence as to how things were actually being done and mapped. But somehow, I think there is a lot of confusion in the minds in terms of saying that when you were talking about the temple, wherein there are 12 pillars and the sun rays goes to the pillar of the certain zodiac sign at the time of the year, uh, are we making a mistake of not looking at it as a scientific astronomical place,
Yes.
than to just and then to just look at it as a temple? Possibly it was a science-based location. It was a library or a experimental location for learning. And
Like I said earlier, we did not have these verticals defined the way we have today. So in ancient India, whether it was storytelling, whether it was art, whether it was science, whether it was astronomy, all of them were woven together. So to say that a temple was not an observatory or a temple was not a community place, it was not a place to celebrate public events, is looking at it from a current day thing, that is, a party hall cannot be used for something else. So it was this, and probably much more. The temple in a traditional, if you look at the ancient villages in South India, they still exist. This temple is at the core of the village, and the village comes up around it. Even Dwarka, if you go, if you can still see the temple is at the center of the city, and all the roads lead to the temple. So it came around it. It was the focus of this. It must have been used for all kinds of things. There are temples in Tamil Nadu where we found public records. So it's like your judicial records on the walls of the temple. So somebody did something and they were given some punishment, and all those records are there on the temple walls. So to pick up, just because we have picked up one piece doesn't mean that other pieces did not exist.
So just moving to the last two questions that I think, because our time's also going to get up. Uh, like things have moved so fast in the last couple of years. How do you think your experiences have changed in the last 24 months? And especially in terms of writing, experiencing and things, because as I see you, you're somebody who experiences things, who's walking through the place and experiencing. But the last couple of years might have actually had an impact on that whole thing or not.
I mean, my last 2 years or the pandemic time was my most productive time in life. I ended up writing 4 or 5 books, if, including the one which is coming, it will be 5 books. I studied astrology, which was a subject that I always wanted to study, but I could never find that single block of time to study. And initial 6 months of lockdown gave me that perfect time to study. I did a lot of workshops. I spoke at a lot of events. So I spoke to a lot of college students. I think I've had an extremely productive time, which I wouldn't have got but for pandemic. So I am actually happy. Yes, I'm itching to travel now, and I'm going to travel this Sunday onwards. But it's been good. It's been good. A lot of material I was sitting on, it has gone into the shape and form it was waiting to go. I have gained a lot more knowledge during this time.
So, very interesting. For me, the biggest thing that I missed during the pandemic was airline food, but that's a separate issue.
How can you miss that?
So because I was regularly traveling. But coming to the last question, like somebody who has reviewed close to about 800 books, and you're on the Limca Book of Records for that.
Yes.
3 of your top books that you would recommend everybody to read, could be on any subject, but which opens up our minds to reality as to how we really need to learn, how do we really need to look at things.
It's very difficult to pick up 3 books. I actually thought about 3 books that you asked me, but I would say one, please read one of my books. Lotus in the Stone has been getting some very, very emotional, overwhelming responses about India. So if possible, read that. Read one of the scriptures, irrespective of what faith, what religion you follow. Read one of your scriptures, any one, at least one in original, and interpret it for yourself. If you can do that, I guess if you are an Indian, the whole library of books to be read will open up, and whatever profession you are pursuing, read about it. Read about its history, and read one topic which you have nothing to do, nothing at all to do with, because that's where you will create an intersection for yourself. So one, your history, your own history, your lineage, whichever lineage you come from, your own history, your own profession, and one absolutely unrelated thing that you have nothing to do with, which you read for pure entertainment.
So on that note, Radha, I think we'll call this conversation to a close. But I must say that one of the most fascinating ideas and the most important ideas that you say is that we should look at diverse reading. We should really bring thoughts together from different schools of thought, different spheres, and really bring it together and nurture it in our minds and probably end up being more creative individuals.
Yes.
On that note, thanks a lot. It was just such a pleasure to have you with us. And thanks a lot for acceding to my invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.